Attention Podcasts. I'm Chris Payne. You're
I'm
Leslie
Leslie.
Simon. You're
I'm Leslie
Leslie
Simon.
Simon.
No, I'm
You're
Leslie
Leslie.
Simon.
Leslie Simon. Leslie Simon. Leslie Simon. What's
Oh my
going
God, you
on?
win. Hi, Chris. How are you?
Doing good. Doing good. It's our first show of the year, and
Sixth
I am.
episode overall. It's amazing.
Man, can you believe it? Can you believe it?
Mm-mm.
6 episodes in,
hmm Half a dozen.
half a dozen. Well, we were making moves here at Desperate for Attention podcast in the new year 2025. We recently confirmed our first guest in
It's
our
true.
podcast's history.
It's a good
What?
one. It's a real
Yeah.
good one.
What should I
How?
say? Uh,
Don't
I'll,
tell too
I'll
much.
I will say that our guest is a writer who
Yes.
has written one of my favorite books of the past few months. There we go.
Yes, that's true. I read that book on your on the bleh. I read the book based on your recommendation, and I was not disappointed. And I am
Hmm.
very much looking forward to speaking to this author. I think it will be a conversation that is in line with all of the things that make Desperate for Attention a must listen, um, as hopefully people's new favorite podcast. Fingers
Yeah,
crossed.
we've got a lot in store for the new year. Interviews with authors, interviews with bands, deep dives on bands, deep dives on current events. And today's episode is one of those deep dives on current events because one of the big bands in the world of 2000s mainstream emo recently did something of note. Leslie, do you want to tell the people about what we're talking about?
Yes, the band is brand new, and the event of note was a very private, somewhat secret, under the radar, intimate show, which marked the first live performance in 7 years from the band. It was in Nashville, Tennessee, in participation with a charity that is near and dear to the hearts of Jesse Lacey and his wife. And it was a kind of short and sweet set, if I'm not mistaken. Not a huge contingent of new songs, though, could be one or two unknown tunes that maybe the band has been working on in private. But again, the details are very unconfirmed at this point.
And before we go too much further, why don't we tell the people who may or may not be super in the know about us and what we do, what our past is in covering this band?
At Alternative Press, I wrote the first cover story on the band, was lucky enough to spend time with them, days with them, in fact, back when magazines had the budgets to do that. And saw a few shows, did some really in-depth interviews with all of the members. And in addition to, watching them play on Warped Tour, just seeing them grow from what was a pretty mainstream poppy, punky type of band that you would have thrown in alongside a Fall Out Boy, maybe a Yellow Card. They really distinguished themselves from the pack with their latter releases, which you wrote a ton about at Billboard. Is that right?
Yeah, in the 2010s, I was Billboard's person on the rock beat and on the independent music industry beat. So when Brand New surprise self-released their 2017 album Science Fiction, and it went straight to number one and surprised everyone, that was my time to shine. Pretty momentous occasion at the Billboard office for me, calling upon all my aughts, New Jersey scene kid acumen of the band explaining Brand New and all that made them so mysterious back then to the people at Billboard. And shortly after that, as you probably know if you're listening to this episode, Jesse Lacey, frontman of Brand New, was accused of sexual misconduct by multiple women who described similar accounts of Lacey as a 20-something preying on them throughout the 2000s when The victims were as young as 15. The band issued, or Jesse Lacey issued a statement via the band, essentially apologizing without directly addressing any of the sexual misconduct allegations, and the band canceled its 2017 touring plans, along with long rumored plans of a big 2018 farewell tour. And they had largely been inactive since, which makes this small show from back on December 15th of note.
Yeah, and if I may just add a bit of context to the 2017 of it all, like you said, they seem to be hinting at a band retirement in 2018. They had just released their latest album, Science Fiction, kind of out of the blue. They had big tour plans planned. It was going to be a really strong last lap for the band and their fans if it had happened as they had imagined it. But once these allegations arose, which was in November of 2017, everything with the band shut down. The statement that Jesse Lacey made seemed to stand for the other members as well. And if you go to any of their socials, it really is like a time capsule, as if people just abandoned whatever they were doing in 2017 on Twitter, on Instagram, on the web, and never returned again. It still has the old branding, it still has old merch. It feels very stuck in a moment that they didn't come out of. But 7 years without really a peep from anybody in any real way, only to discover a recap after the fact that they had played this show in Nashville. Needless to say, the subreddit for Brand New was in overdrive, going hyperactive. But besides the hardcore, loyal fan base that has maintained a high level of interest since 2017, you and I noticed a real lack of coverage in what otherwise would have been a really big news event for anyone else in the scene.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really notable how few publications covered this show. From what I can tell, Loudwire did the most extensive reporting on it, and
Mhm.
most of what we're pulling from here was aggregated by Loudwire's story.
Right.
Also,
Vice.
Vice, Vice in the first
Yeah,
paragraph of Vice's story, they describe Brand New as the New Jersey screamo band.
sure.
So
Yeah.
that gives you the Brand New, who are of course from Long Island, New York. So that gives you the level of attention and
Yes.
fact checking that's going into the Brand New return
The
here.
beat. Yeah, over
Yeah,
at Vice, not noisy, it should be mentioned too. And
yeah.
they also, I think, cite the third outlet that we noticed coverage on, which was NME. So their coverage wasn't even their coverage, it was coverage of other coverage. So it's a little bit a game of telephone in terms of their news sourcing, but it feels like it should have been a bigger headline given the clout of the band and the air of mystery that's always surrounded them and their long awaited return by some. And it just wasn't. But that doesn't mean that maybe there isn't more to the story, even though people haven't covered the story yet. I don't think we know what the story is, and that's part of why we're talking today.
Yeah, we're gonna get into it in this episode, how we feel about it personally, where we think it might go from here, our best educated guesses for what 2025 holds in store. To continue on your point, Leslie, about the coverage, it was very minimal, and I can't quite figure out if it's because the show happened in the second half of December in,
Mm-hmm.
a pretty much a dead zone of
Mm-hmm.
reporting and publications when a lot of people are gone for the holidays.
Yeah.
Releases have slowed down. People are pretty much checked out. I wonder how much of it was that versus Brand New is just that much of a persona non grata among publications in music.
I love that phrase. I feel like also before we get into the real kind of like weeds of all of this is Perhaps there is a trigger warning to issue in case there's anyone who is uncomfortable and not wanting to relive some of the less savory headlines about the band. This would probably be just a warning to tread lightly. But yeah, Chris, I don't know if there's still a blacklist that has the bands and their names on it. And no matter what they do, we do not cover these bands. But on the other side of things, there's a really large contingent of high profile fans who are not shy about touting their love for Brand New over the last few years in particular, and without any backlash to that open adoration. People like Halsey. Last night, the night before we taped this, in fact, Paris Jackson posted a cover of Brand New, and the comments were overwhelmingly positive, which was overwhelmingly shocking, I think, to both of us. But coming from the other side of things in coverage, right, in publications, we don't know if the conversations behind the scenes are, hey, we don't want to give this band any more ink, but it could also be very easily, like you said, Chris, that people were out of town, and by the time they came in or by the time they returned from vacation, it wasn't really news anymore because there wasn't more information beyond they played a show. It was very private. It had no fanfare other than being in participation with a charity event. So, what other angle is there besides that?
I mean, if people really wanted to get into it, I mean, there's a big angle because I think if Brand New announced a show tomorrow, I mean, like I think Brand New, if they announced any show in the New York area at any venue in New York City, it would sell out in a day. Any
Yeah.
venue up through Madison Square Garden. And that speaks to, I think, how many people still have an appetite to pay money to see this band. I mean, when it comes down to with these talks of like cancellation and artists being canceled, the way I think it's really best defined is like, are people still paying for what it is you do? Because if they
Mhm.
still are, you can complain, whine and complain about like mainstream media or whatever not covering your shit. But if your fans are still forking over the money to go see you play, you're not canceled. And I think Brand New, they stepped aside voluntarily, quasi-voluntarily.
Mhm.
But I do think the fact remains, and this is just my best educated guess from being close to this music and following this scene really since the early 2000s, that if Brand New was to announce shows, that they would sell out and sell out very quickly. And like I said, especially in the New York City area where they're from, they could play arenas.
Yeah, I think you're definitely spot on with New York being, it has always been the epicenter of their popularity. It will forever continue to be the epicenter. Though I agree with you, I do think that they would not have a problem selling tickets. I don't know if we can really gauge true interest on a mass scale because, as far as I can tell, they have not released anything, right? Like, it's not as if they've repackaged anything. They've put out a bunch of new merch. They've done record store day. They have
Well,
been
sorry to interrupt, but they did post to streaming services an EP from 2003. They posted it right around the same time as this show from back on December 15th.
not for
Um,
sale or for sale.
Not for sale, but like, they posted it and it hadn't been there and it'll earn money off of the streams it gets. It was the holiday EP from 2003, went up right around the same time as the show.
Probably the most benign thing they could possibly release, right?
It is,
Like,
but like they're doing stuff. It's like that brand new LLC still exists. It's still raking in money from the
oh
streams.
yeah,
You
sure.
know, they're still an active business entity.
Yes. I
They
mean,
haven't shut it down.
no, and I don't imagine that they are not earning from merch as well. there are still people interested in advertising on their person their love for brand new in the 2020s, right? Like, I don't think that we've gone to the extent of people not wanting to be known for liking the band, but it's unknown, I think, from a quantifiable standpoint, how interested openly people are in, like you said, spending money, forking over money, and for what duration. If it was another one-time thing, okay, we're going to continue where we left off in 2017 to really run that last lap for the band and just offer closure and finish things up. That's a potential path. Another potential path could also be that they pick up where they left off and continue to be a band and create and produce and tour. That's a very distinct possibility. From all accounts, at least through looking at their socials, they're all still very close with each other, which I think is the most important factor in assuming that there could be intention. If they had no connection to each other anymore and they didn't speak and they didn't talk, they didn't follow each other, like, I think that would indicate that it was a bit of a long shot. But I feel like I don't have any expectations of brand new because anything I expect they don't do, and anything I don't expect they do.
Yeah, it's pretty ambiguous. I mean, this could just have been a thing of them wanting to do something that they enjoy and keep it very private because, from how the show was described in this Loudwire story, it was like just for friends and family, kind of an invite only, no phones kind of thing.
Right.
But, it also, for all we know, it could be them testing the waters to see what the reaction is like, how they feel, and, testing the waters of what would it be like if they announced more public shows on a bigger scale. It could be that too.
Yeah, there are a lot of possibilities, and I don't doubt that if the four of them decide to entertain the possibility that they are going through every single scenario of what they would be willing to do and what would be the potential outcome of that path.
Yeah, so I think where we're going with this, which I want to get more into in this episode, is how do we feel personally about the return of Brand New, given what Jesse Lacey has done and given our reporting and our relationship with the band over the years. Let's get into that.
Yeah, for sure. At the time that I worked at AP and was sent out to cover the band for the cover story, it was a very fraught encounter. And I was so excited. I loved the band so much. I really wanted to do them justice. I knew they had a huge legacy, and the fans were going to check me if I got anything wrong. And there was an air to Jesse in the way that he, I don't want to say behaved in a sense that he did anything wrong, but it felt like he was hyper aware of everything that he was doing in front of me. Um, Sort of that it was a performance in and of itself outside of the band performing. He was known to demand a certain amount of control in the way that he was portrayed, but this would be a situation where ultimately he did not have sign off on things pertaining to his likeness. He was not going to read what was written about him before it was printed. And I could kind of gather that he was not cool with that, but there wasn't anything that he could do about it. I feel like their openness to press and participating in a lot of the expected steps along the way for promotion just got completely shut down after their experiences with alternative press. They could have also stemmed from experiences with other outlets, but I think that they felt the most comfortable when they could manipulate their image exactly how they wanted to portray themselves. And anything outside of that was not anything they were interested in participating in.
And we're talking about the Deja era here, like
We
2003,
are.
their second album, Deja Entendu. That was that where they blew up and where they started getting major label attention before that album even came out, just off of the advance copies. So when you got to speak to them was really the last point before they became a potential cash cow band who didn't really need the media in
That's
some
right.
ways at that point. And them being so cagey with how they were perceived and what people said about them. I think as soon as they had that chance to dip out, they absolutely did that. And, Brand New really didn't do any traditional press from the day from after the Deja cycle. So you
Yeah,
got it,
and
Leslie. You you
I
you
I
got
got
you got
it.
it.
And funny enough, Luke Wood, the A&R rep who signed them, who also famously signed and worked with Nirvana, was at the show in New York City that I was at covering as part of this jaunt. And he was so excited about signing the band. There was electricity almost permeating off of him. And getting them was such a get at the time because they were the biggest next big thing. And all of the labels were interested in signing them. And based on what they were doing and what they were about circa Deja was definitely the opposite of where they went on their major label debut, which thinking back, Luke must have just been so stoked to get Deja the sequel as the first release on Interscope, and that could not be further from what they released as their major label debut.
Yeah, Devil and God are Raging Inside Me, their 2007 album or 2006 album. Uh got very little promotion really from Interscope Records, was not a commercial success by any means, but was critically acclaimed and beloved by their fans. That continued with Daisy a couple years later. Then there's several years of mostly radio silence, a couple singles here and there. The band establishing their own label after leaving Interscope Records, and then 2017, their album Science Fiction drops. And like I said earlier in the podcast, total surprise to the music industry, goes to number one on the Billboard 200 albums charts, despite being entirely self-released. At that point, it was really just them on their own label with Fred Feldman from Triple Crown Records and Zach Cirillo from Property of Zach, who helps them along with their label. And when I was at Billboard then, I didn't do any interviews with the band, but I spent some time with Fred around the time of the release and, talked about how it all came together and was there for that and got a window into that experience. And that was pretty thrilling for me because, as a kid growing up in the scene, this was before like I had done the book. I think I was still kind of grappling with being a fan of like emo in general, and this album represented a more like mature version of the genre, a more like for the heads version of the genre
Mm.
with weird guitar tunings and weird song structures, and it showed like something that advanced had, come out of the scene. Showed it was still relevant, and they were just a cooler band then than so much of the bands they came up with, the way they evolved. But that all changed really quickly for me because, once what Lacey did came out, it was really difficult for me. I just really didn't want to like listen to the band anymore, For them, like they were one of my favorite bands, and so much of the appeal was the songwriting of Jesse Lacey and like listening to the songs and getting really into the lyrics and the place they were coming from. And once what he did was made public, it was just like, nah, I do not want to go there anymore. So since then, it's been, listening to Brand New here and there for uh, research for things like this or my book, and certainly a different take on them as they
Yeah,
move on.
it's definitely, their evolution as a band and their evolution, the evolution of how they were perceived in the scene changed super drastically. Well, it seemed like it changed super drastically in the sense that they started in this Technicolor and kind of bright, not necessarily optimistic, but self-deprecating with a wink that you definitely could relate to and understand. But after Deja, they did seem to steer into a direction that, as someone who related to the brightness of them, felt more dark and ominous. It felt more haunted. It felt more distanced from the relatability of the first two records. And I think that that was completely intentional. And that was where the band was going. But it was also a means for them to break away from the pack of bands that they were being lumped in with, that I think in some regard they were embarrassed to be considered peers of. They ended in a place where there was no one like them, for better or for worse, whether you liked them in their final form or you preferred something that had more melody. Um, they did not seem to have the peers when they were starting out in the scene. Um, and I think that also speaks to this air of mystery and the enigma of the band, because when they cut off the media and they were no longer explaining their intentions or their inspirations. Um, all you had were the lyrics, and all you had was the silence of, um, not speaking for themselves, that the songs had to speak for themselves. And I think that that just added to their lore, whether or not Jesse and or anybody else from the band will ever speak on anything ever again, I have no idea. Like I said, they make the most um counterintuitive decisions that are typical brand new, but whatever I think they're gonna do, they do the opposite. So I just never say never with them. But that would be such a fascinating read to know what was happening on the other side of things, because all we know was the shutdown and the lockdown. No one broke rank. No one has talked since 2017, as far as I can tell. That's a pretty crazy, tight-knit organization to not have anyone step out and speak on anything that's happened. That's extremely impressive.
Yeah, and little bits trickle out here and there. I mean, the few things I heard, I was told off the record a handful of times. I think it was kind of common knowledge in this world that they did have a very big tour planned in 2018. My
Mm-hmm.
educated guess is it was at least one arena in the New
Mm-hmm.
York City area. Wouldn't be surprised if it was like MSG and also Nassau Coliseum on Long
Mm-hmm.
Island. Maybe arenas across the country, maybe a mix of, whatever, like a big tour.
Well,
It was gonna,
and
they had a big tour most likely planned for 2018, and
they were
yeah,
playing big festivals at the time. They weren't, this wasn't just like a skate and surf band anymore. I mean, they were playing gigantic festivals with gigantic bands. They were gigantic. It might not have been a one-to-one comparison with someone like Coldplay, but they were still legends in the scene that they were from. I mean,
yeah,
like you can't
absolutely.
discount that at all.
Yeah, and then if around the time I was working on the book, I want to say like 2021, 2022, I heard maybe like third hand, fourth hand that basically Jesse Lacey didn't want to go out like that, that
Mm.
he wanted to come back. But
I mean, who would want to go out
nothing,
like that?
nothing ever came of that, at least that we know of. Or they never played any shows up until this really small one. Or I think Jesse may have played small stuff solo in the
Sure.
past year, 18 months, but essentially nothing big in public from them.
Well, that's a really an interesting point, considering, okay, of course, that's not how you want to go out, right? You do not want to be discredited. You do not want to tarnish your legacy because he had a pretty healthy and just like otherworldly type of impact on the next generation of bands in the scene. But I wonder how much of him potentially wanting to finish what he started came from wanting to make it right and wanting to offer closure and wanting to give fans a great last experience versus wanting to end things on his terms and wanting to do things his way because that was taken away from him the first time. Again, I don't think that it is a secret that he was a control freak. So, him wanting to have the last say his way totally checks out.
Yeah, and I keep going back to how the band is held publicly now. Because within media, this snapshot of reactions to the show, as an example, they're pretty much blacklisted within media, and, for good reason.
Yeah, yeah,
But when you go outside of people who work in music, people who work in journalism, etc., and just go to fans of the band, there's still a lot of demand for this band. All you need to do is just like go to the brand new subreddit and see how
yeah,
frequently people post there and how fervent the posts are.
yeah.
Like lots of people would be buying tickets and buying merchandise if this band did play. The next step, though, is in order to play live on that scale, you need other people to put it on. You need booking agents. You need a promoter. You need a venue to play. And because they are such pariahs within the scene, I wonder if they would be able to pull that together.
I don't know. And I also wonder, are they still blacklisted? I think is what it comes down to. Are they still a band that would be unwelcome on a bill alongside 20 other artists? Would they ever come out of the shadows to appear on a Coachella bill or Lollapalooza or like someplace where maybe it's not just about the scene bands, but it's about just bands and they wouldn't be as polarizing.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the non-scene stuff because perhaps they could slip through the cracks in something like a Coachella lineup where most of the people there have no idea who they are. It seems like it could be that or just doing shows kind of ad hoc where they're the only band playing and they're setting them
Hmm.
up on their own terms and using as few outsiders as possible. And the, outside hands who are putting on the show are doing it with as much anonymity as they can. It seems like those are the only two ways. I can't picture them playing on a bill with like a bunch of other bands from their world. I just can't.
No, and that also brings up the question of like how big is their crew now? Like who is in the organization of Brand New? They self-managed? Do they still have booking representation? I read something about their merch company going bankrupt. Like who is in charge of the retail stuff? Like who is their crew? Because even just the maintenance of Brand New as an entity has to, I'd imagine, go beyond the four members because they're not experts in every single field of distribution and publishing and all of that. So, who are the people that they have as their team now? And could and would those people continue to work on the band and build the band? Because I think maintaining a level versus expecting growth are two different expectations
Yeah, and it makes me think with enough money, you can get people to do a lot of things,
for
right?
sure.
This, a tour would make a ton of money, but would people from this world be willing? I mean, first of all, would it sit well with them? Would they want to? I
Hmm.
mean, I wouldn't want to do it, but that's just me.
Right.
For people, like, would they be willing to put their necks out there for the paycheck they're going to get from it? I don't know, because I think in other genres, perhaps, but I think so much of the reason why Brand New, either by their own choice or by the force of others, went away was because they came from a scene that was very much founded on progressive values,
Mm,
a scene that was founded on like looking out for women and queer people. If you go far back enough and, hold it to those standards, a scene that calls out abusers. I think that's why an artist like Brand New had that 2018 tour, farewell tour, disappear, where maybe artists who are much more in the pop world have done far worse thing. I mean, it feels icky to make comparisons, but like,
It's a
why
spectrum. It's a
artists,
spectrum.
yeah, why artists in other genres, more mainstream genres, who have done similar things, are still performing today. I think it goes back to like the scene Brand New comes from and who their grassroots fans are and what values those people have.
Just the touring machine today is very different than it was 7, 8 years ago. The ticket prices, for one thing, are drastically different. I mean, back when Brandy was starting and they were playing matinee shows, or, you were going to see them at Warped Tour, I mean, paying $35 for a ticket was normal. And that actually seemed expensive at the time. So, are people willing to spend what it would cost to put on a brand new event, a brand new concert? Because I don't think it's going to be a cheap endeavor for anybody. But I haven't seen, I don't know if you can think of anybody, I haven't really seen anyone in the music scene that has recovered as well from allegations of, sexual impropriety. I have seen it more successfully done in like the world of comedy, in the sense that, Aziz Ansari has done tours, and of course Louis C.K. has done successful tours. The level or the ability to forgive in that medium seems to be a bit greater than in ours, but I really don't know if we could make a call until given the distinct like reality of buying a ticket and how many people will buy a ticket. And again, is it a one-time ticket or is it a tour of tickets? There's so many variables.
Yeah, you said it, Leslie. I think we covered a lot. Is there anything else that comes to mind that we haven't touched on here that feels pertinent?
A lot, the majority of this conversation, whether overtly or through inference, is about Jesse Lacey. He is the front person of the band. He was, when giving interviews on behalf of the band, he was the mouthpiece. He was the sole lyricist. But there are three other people that constitute Brand New in a traditional sense. What do they think? What did they think? What do they think? Um, how pissed would you be if your world imploded not for anything that you directly did? And for that, I would love, as a human, just to know what that felt like and what happened. It's not all about Jesse. I mean, this whole situation's just not all about Jesse. But when it comes down to the future of the band, as long as it's a four-person entity, which I think it is, I don't think it's the Jesse Lacey show. I'd love to just know what they think and where they stand. And I don't think we're ever going to get that conversation from them. But even more than Jesse's inner dialogue, I just would love to hear from the other members.
Well, allegedly, you can pretty much tell from the pictures, but I guess I'll say allegedly that they were all on stage playing at the Nashville show last month.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that tells you at least something about that.
Yeah. I I guess we'll see. I mean, 2025 only has 2 weeks in the books, and crazy twists and turns are inevitable. During my years at Paramount, I worked on Big Brother, and the unofficial tagline is expect the unexpected. And I have applied it to nearly every corner of my life, and I guarantee you that we are in for some very unexpected happenings and headlines this year. And I can't wait to find out what they are.
So, Leslie, now that we're at the end, why don't you tell the people more about the podcast, how they can stay up with us?
Yes, absolutely. If you have not listened to the first 5 episodes of Desperate for Attention, what are you waiting for? They're so good. Go to your favorite podcasting platform and subscribe and follow and share and comment and rate us. That's really helpful. We can be found on most socials at Desperate for Attention Pod. Um, Chris and I individually are also known to post a thing or two on socials. I am at Red Pattern Dress. And Chris, what's your handle?
My handle on socials is at Payne on a plane. So yeah, hit us up if you're interested in the show. Let us know what you think. And we really appreciate you guys all listening. Seriously. This is a totally independent thing between the two of us. We've both
Hmm.
worked for a lot of like big brands and publications before, and we just we did a reading event together in New York City. And we were like, hey, we should do a podcast together. That was last summer, and here we are doing this all on our own. So it's
Yeah,
fun, and we appreciate you guys listening.
absolutely. And this was a complicated topic, and there is no answer, and there is no like no one right, no one wrong. But really good discussion, I think.
All right. Well, thanks, Leslie. This was interesting, and hope you guys enjoyed listening, and we'll catch you guys next week.
Bye.